There's something almost nobody talks about when it comes to influence, attraction, and power. It's not your looks. It's not your money. It's not how funny you are or how many impressive things you've accomplished. It's something far simpler and far more counterintuitive. It's your silence, your absence, the space you leave when you decide not to fill every moment with noise. Most men have been conditioned to believe that the path to connection is through constant communication, more texts, more calls, more availability. Show up, show interest, make yourself known. Chase hard enough and long enough, and eventually it works out. That's the story, and it's almost entirely wrong. The men who understand silence, who've learned to sit in it, use it deliberately, and let it do the work, operate in a completely different reality. People come to them. People think about them. People wonder what they're doing, what they're thinking, why they're not saying more. Silence creates a gravitational pull that noise destroys completely. This isn't about being cold. It's not about playing games or being emotionally unavailable in ways that damage real connection. It's about understanding the deep psychology behind why humans are wired to pursue what they can't fully read. Why mystery creates hunger. Why the person who doesn't explain themselves commands more respect than the one who justifies every decision. We're going to go through 9 specific reasons. Silence makes people chase you. Not theories, not abstract philosophy. Real psychological mechanisms that are operating on every person around you, whether you understand them or not. After this, you'll never look at quiet the same way again. Reason 1. Silence creates a vacuum. The mind rushes to fill. Here's how the human brain works. It cannot tolerate incompleteness. When information is missing, your mind doesn't just shrug and move on. It generates possibilities. It constructs narratives. It starts working overtime to fill the gap with something, anything, because ambiguity feels like a threat, and the brain treats unresolved questions like open loops that demand closure. This isn't a weakness. It's a survival mechanism. For hundreds of thousands of years, not understanding what something meant could get you killed. The rustling in the grass. Is it wind or a predator? You couldn't afford to ignore it. So your brain evolved to keep scanning, keep analyzing, keep trying to resolve the unknown. When you go silent on someone, you trigger that exact same mechanism. They sent a message and you didn't respond right away. They expected a reaction, and you gave none. They said something provocative, and you just looked at them quietly. Now their brain has an open loop, an unresolved question, and it will not let it go. They start thinking about you. Not because you're doing anything impressive in that moment, but because you're unresolved, mysterious, unknown. And the mind pursues what it doesn't understand with remarkable persistence. Most men hand over the answer immediately. Someone texts them and they respond within seconds. Someone provokes them and they immediately defend themselves. Someone pulls back and they rush forward with explanations and reassurances. Every single time they do this, they close the loop. The brain on the other end gets its answer, releases its tension, and moves on. Nothing to chase, nothing to wonder about, nothing to think about at 2 o'clock in the morning. The man who understands silence withholds the answer sometimes. Not always, not cruelly, but strategically. He lets the question sit. He allows the loop to stay open. And he trusts the other person's brain to do the work of obsessing over him without him lifting a finger. Reason 2. Silence signals that you have a life worth being silent for. When you respond instantly to everything, you communicate something very specific. You communicate availability. And availability, when it's unlimited and unconditional, signals that you have nothing else going on, nothing competing for your attention, nothing pulling you away. Think about the most compelling people you've known in your life, the ones who had genuine magnetism. Were they constantly available? Were they always the first to respond? Always ready with a comment? Always hovering near their phone waiting for your message? Almost certainly not. They had things happening. Things you weren't entirely privy to. You had to work slightly to get their time and attention, and that work made you value it more. This is not about manufacturing fake busyness. Men who pretend to be busy when they're not are not using silence. They're performing it, and people can almost always smell the performance underneath. The real version of this is simpler and more demanding. Actually build a life that requires your attention. Actually have pursuits that matter to you. Actually be invested in something beyond the approval and attention of whoever you're trying to attract. When that's your reality, silence becomes automatic. You don't respond immediately because you're genuinely absorbed in something else. You don't explain your absence because it's obvious. You have a life. And the signal that sends is one of the most attractive things a man can communicate. People are drawn to others who are living, not just existing, not waiting, living. When your silence comes from genuine engagement with the world, it carries a weight and a scent that people pick up on without being able to articulate exactly why. Reason 3. Silence protects your power. Every time you speak unnecessarily, you give something away. Every time you over-explain, you surrender leverage. Every time you fill silence because it makes you uncomfortable, you reveal your anxiety. And anxiety in a man is the single fastest way to destroy the attraction and respect others have for him. There's an old principle in negotiation that the person who speaks first after an offer is made loses. The discomfort of silence is so intense for most people that they rush to break it. They offer concessions, they reduce their ask, they explain their position further, even when further explanation weakens it. They do all of this simply because they cannot sit in the discomfort of quiet. The man who can sit in that discomfort holds enormous power, not because he's being manipulative, but because silence forces the other person to surface their real position, to reveal their cards, to show you how much they care. When you respond to every accusation with a defense, you validate the accusation as worthy of your energy. When you respond to every provocation with emotion, you show that you can be moved, manipulated, pushed around with the right words. When you explain yourself to people who haven't earned that explanation, you reduce yourself in their eyes without realizing it. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of restraint, of choosing not to speak when speaking serves no purpose but your own discomfort relief. There is profound power in the man who is comfortable with the fact that others may misunderstand him, may form wrong opinions, may not have the complete picture, and chooses not to correct the record simply because silence is more powerful than justification. This isn't indifference, it's discipline. And people feel the discipline underneath silence the way they feel steel beneath a handshake. Reason 4. Silence creates space for others to invest. Here's something most men get exactly backwards. They believe that to win someone's interest, they must demonstrate their value constantly. So they talk, they entertain, they perform. They tell the stories, make the jokes, offer the insights, fill every silence with something that proves they belong in the room. And it works to a degree. People can be entertained. People can be impressed. But entertained and impressed are not the same as emotionally invested. And emotional investment is what creates the chase. Emotional investment happens when a person contributes their own energy to something, when they think about you on their own time, when they generate questions and curiosity without you prompting it, when they look forward to conversations because they have things they want to bring to you, not just because you reliably bring things to them. When you never stop talking, you rob people of the opportunity to invest. They become passive recipients of your performance rather than active participants in an exchange. And passive recipients don't chase. They consume, enjoy, maybe appreciate, and move on. But when you go quiet, you create a vacuum they naturally want to fill. They start talking, start asking questions, start reaching out with, "I was thinking about what you said the other day." They become active, and activity creates attachment. People value what they work for in a way they cannot value what was simply given to them. This is a fundamental principle of psychology, sometimes called the effort justification effect. The harder someone works to obtain something, the more they value it. By giving yourself freely and constantly, you unwittingly ensure you'll never be truly valued. By requiring some effort, even just the effort of wondering, of reaching out, of initiating, you become someone worth chasing. Reason 5. Silence is rare, and rarity creates desire. We live in a noise economy. Every person around you is constantly broadcasting. Social media, text messages, opinions, updates, reactions, commentary on every event as it unfolds. The signal-to-noise ratio of modern human interaction is catastrophically low. Almost everything anyone communicates is filler, and filler becomes invisible. When you choose silence deliberately, when you speak less than those around you, when your words are chosen rather than reflexive, when you don't have an opinion ready on everything all the time, you become unusual. And unusual draws attention in ways that ordinary simply cannot. Think about a room full of people all talking at the same volume. Now one person goes quiet. Where does attention naturally move? To the quiet person. Why? Because silence in a noisy room is an anomaly. The brain identifies anomalies as potentially important. You have suddenly become the most interesting person in the room, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say. This applies beyond social situations. The man who doesn't text back constantly is more interesting than the one who does. The man who doesn't explain his decisions is more compelling than the one who justifies everything. The man who can sit with a woman and not feel the need to fill every moment with talk creates a kind of tension and depth that the man who chatters nervously never can. Desire is fundamentally tied to scarcity. This is not cynical. It's not manipulative. It's just true. We want what is rare. We take for granted what is abundantly available. Water is essential to life, and when it's everywhere, you don't think about it. Tell someone water is running out, and suddenly it's all they can think about. Your silence is the equivalent of scarcity in a world drowning in availability. Reason 6. Silence forces others to project their best image of you onto you. When you speak extensively, you define yourself completely. You reveal your opinions, your insecurities, your inconsistencies, your jokes that don't land, your beliefs that might not align with the other person's. You become fully known. And fully known means you're now being judged as a complete picture, flaws and all. When you're strategically silent, something remarkable happens. People fill in the blanks with their own imagination. And in that imagination, they often construct a version of you that's even more compelling than you actually are. They assume depth because you don't reveal shallowness. They assume confidence because you don't reveal anxiety. They assume intelligence because you don't speak carelessly. This is not about deception. You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're simply choosing not to undercut your own image by broadcasting every thought you have. The mystery allows their mind to idealize, and idealization creates powerful attraction. Carl Jung talked about the process of projection, the unconscious tendency to assign our own inner qualities to people outside us. When someone is an open book, projection has nowhere to land. But give someone a partially drawn figure, and the unconscious mind completes the picture from its own storehouse of images. A silent, grounded man becomes whatever the person looking at him needs him to be, on some level. A hero, a protector, a challenge, a puzzle worth solving. The moment you over-explain yourself, you collapse that projection. You become specific and known. And while being known is essential in genuine intimacy, being known too quickly and too completely to the wrong people is how you become forgettable instead of magnetic. Reason 7. Silence demonstrates emotional regulation, and emotional regulation is deeply attractive. One of the most ancient biological signals of male fitness is the ability to remain calm under pressure, to not be destabilized by threats, provocations, or uncertainty, to not need to react to everything immediately. The man who can be challenged without flinching, insulted without retaliating, ignored without panicking, that man communicates something very deep about his inner stability. When you can't tolerate silence, when you must respond, must explain, must pursue, you broadcast emotional dysregulation. You announce to the world that your internal state depends on external validation. And nothing is less attractive than a man whose emotional equilibrium requires constant reassurance from outside himself. The brain reads silence as control, not always consciously. But when you don't react to a provocation with immediate emotion, you signal that your emotional responses are governed from the inside rather than pulled out of you by external events. That's power. That's the kind of person others gravitate toward because stability is magnetic when anxiety is everywhere. Think about the men you respect most, the ones who genuinely command a room, not through volume, but through presence. They don't scramble to prove themselves. They don't panic when they're not getting attention. They don't need to respond to every slight or challenge. Their silence in those moments isn't passivity. It's the quiet of a person who is completely at ease with themselves. This is the Stoic ideal made real. Not the performance of indifference, but the genuine development of a self that doesn't depend on constant external input to feel okay. And ironically, the more you cultivate that genuine inner calm, the more people will pursue you trying to get access to it. Everyone wants to be near someone who has found peace, because peace is the thing most people are desperately searching for and failing to find. Reason 8. Silence. After an argument or conflict is the most powerful move you can make. Most men, when they're in conflict with someone important to them, default to one of two modes. Either they get louder, push harder, press their point, try to win through volume and persistence. Or they go into anxious appeasement mode, rushing to apologize, smooth things over, eliminate the discomfort as fast as possible. Both moves reveal the same underlying problem, an inability to be comfortable with unresolved tension. And that discomfort is what the other person sees. It's what they feel, and it almost always makes the conflict worse rather than better. The man who can go quiet after conflict, genuinely quiet, not passive, aggressively silent, but genuinely at peace with leaving things unresolved for a period, communicates something nobody else is communicating. He says, without saying it, I am not desperate for your approval even now. I am not going to chase resolution just to relieve my own anxiety. I am okay. That calmness after conflict does two things. First, it allows both people to actually process what happened rather than burning through another cycle of reactive emotion. Real resolution almost never happens in the heat of the moment. It happens in the quiet after. By going silent, you create the conditions where genuine understanding is actually possible. Second, and more relevant to why it creates chase, it makes the other person uncertain. Not cruelly uncertain, but genuinely uncertain about your level of need for them. And the moment someone realizes they might not be as essential to your emotional stability as they thought, something activates in them. Something that looks a lot like the desire to prove their importance, the desire to reconnect, the desire to close the distance you've allowed to exist. This is not about punishing people with silence. The difference between weaponized silence and powerful silence is your internal state. If you're quiet because you're genuinely processing and genuinely at peace with uncertainty, that energy comes across completely differently than if you're quiet to make someone suffer. One is manipulation, the other is strength. Reason 9. Silence builds presence, and presence is what people actually chase. Every single reason we've discussed leads here, to this final, deepest principle. The thing that silence ultimately creates when practiced consistently and genuinely over time across every area of your life. Presence. Real presence. Not the performance of it, not the social media version of it. The actual, felt, physical presence of a man who is fully inhabiting himself, who is not scattered across dozens of conversations and constant performance and reflexive reactions, but who is her. Solid, grounded, undivided, undivided. People talk about presence like it's something mysterious, but it's not. Presence is simply what remains when all the unnecessary noise is removed. When you stop filling every moment with talk, you start actually inhabiting the moments. You start listening in a way most people never listen because they're too busy preparing their next sentence. You start observing. You start processing. You start becoming the kind of person who, when they do speak, says something that lands because it came from genuine attention rather than anxious filler. Presence is rare, catastrophically rare in the modern world. The average person you encounter is barely there. They're mentally composing their next post. They're planning what to say next. They're managing 3 text conversations while pretending to be in one conversation with you. They're physically present, but psychologically elsewhere. When you are actually here, when you've stripped back the noise, cultivated silence as a practice, and developed the capacity to be in a moment without needing to immediately translate it into some kind of performance or output, people feel it. They feel it in a way they cannot always name. All they know is that being with you feels different, more real, more substantial, like they're in contact with something solid in a world full of surfaces, and they will chase that. Not because you're playing games, not because you're withholding, but because genuine presence is the thing everyone is starving for in a world that has traded depth for speed, substance for volume, meaning for noise. This is the final truth about silence. The men who have learned to live in it, not as a strategy, but as a way of being, don't need to chase anything. They become the still point in a turning world. And the turning world circles them. Putting it all together, 9 reasons, 9 ways that silence, real, chosen, practiced silence, creates the kind of gravity that makes people move toward you rather than away from you. The vacuum the mind rushes to fill. The signal of a life worth living. The protection of your own power. The space created for others to invest. The scarcity that generates desire. The projection that builds idealization. the emotional regulation that signals deep stability, the post-conflict quiet that makes people question their assumptions about your need, and the presence, the rare, real, undivided presence that every human being is desperately searching for. None of this requires you to become cold. None of it requires you to stop connecting, stop communicating, stop showing up fully in the relationships that matter to you. Real intimacy requires you to be known. Real connection requires genuine communication. The point is not to be silent forever and with everyone. The point is to understand that most of the talking you're doing right now is not serving you. Most of the explaining, the justifying, the filling of silence because it makes you uncomfortable. That noise is costing you. It's costing you power, respect, attraction, and the deep sense of self that comes from a man who has learned to be at peace inside himself without needing the world's constant confirmation. Stop filling the silence. Let it work. Let the other person wonder. Let the space between you and them become charged rather than immediately collapsed. Let your quiet communicate what your words never could. Let your absence make your presence more powerful when you do show up. The men who understand this live differently. They move through the world with less effort and more effect. They attract more and pursue less. They command rooms without raising their voice. They hold relationships without clutching them. That's not a trick. That's not a manipulation tactic. That's the result of a man who has done the real work. The inner work of becoming someone who doesn't need noise to feel okay. Who doesn't need constant approval to feel worth something. Who has found the still, quiet center of himself and decided to live from there. The world will come to a man like that. It always does.